I feel that it is very, very unfair for you to use your opinion against me in this scenario. That's not what I'm doing. I'm stating the facts.
When Meghan Markle settled into the chair opposite Christiane Amanpour at CNN's New York studio, expectations hovered like stage lights. Two formidable women in a conversation about truth, media, and legacy. The set promised civility. The stakes promised friction. What began poised and professional shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. Amanpour's measured curiosity met Markle's polished restraint. Under the heat of the lamps, the veneer of cordiality thinned, and a quiet contest took shape. Technique versus poise, question versus control. The studio was immaculate. Soft gray walls, gold-trimmed lines, glass polished to a quiet gleam. In the control room, a producer counted down, a fingertip poised above the talkback. Tally lights blinked red. Christiane scanned her notes one last time. Annotations in the margins, arrows in the edges, the shorthand of a lifetime in journalism. Opposite her, Meghan in a cream blazer and silk blouse, posture perfect, expression composed, serene or deliberately so. A glass of water waited, untouched, catching the light. "Good evening," Amanpour began, voice warm, cadence exact. "Tonight we're joined by Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, an advocate, producer, and former senior royal, to talk about life beyond the palace, her projects, and the global conversations she continues to inspire." Meghan nodded, a small smile. "Thank you, Christiane. I'm glad to be here to talk about what really matters." The opening minutes flowed. Meghan spoke about her foundation, her podcast, her advocacy for women's rights. The camera loved her. Angles soft, focus kind. Answers arrived wrapped in precision, every phrase balanced on message. Christiane listened, inviting elaboration, steering gently. Then the questions tightened, less about initiatives, more about accountability and narrative. Silence became a tool, a half-beat stretched. Meghan redirected, folding broader themes into pointed queries, choosing principle over particular. Amanpour tried again, a question rephrased, then sharpened. Meghan's smile held, but her words hardened around familiar contours. In the control room, someone mouthed, "Hold!" The hum of the studio seemed louder. Respect didn't disappear. It thinned. A glance down at notes, a sip of water. A nod that looked like a shield. What had begun as a conversation became a negotiation, of frames, of facts, of who gets to define a story in real time. By the final segment, applause lines met with cool counter-questions. The credits loomed. When the lights dimmed and the microphones slipped off, the air felt charged. One woman walked out to quiet, admiring smiles for her composure. The other left with a tight jaw and eyes that flashed. The cameras cooled. The room exhaled. Christiane caught it first. The almost imperceptible set in Meghan's shoulders, a steel thread beneath satin. A faint brace entered her voice whenever a question skimmed too near controversy. "So," Christiane said, turning a page, "you've often spoken about finding freedom, leaving one of the most traditional institutions in modern history. Looking back, did you find it?" Meghan's smile held, but her eyes narrowed by a degree. "Freedom is personal," she said, light-edged. "It isn't about geography or escape. It's about living your truth. I've done that consistently despite the ways the media has tried to reshape it." Christiane nodded, unhurried. "You mentioned the media. Do you think the coverage has been unfair or simply uncomfortable?" Meghan released a short, unsmiling laugh. "There's a difference between discomfort and deliberate cruelty. Much of what's been written about me wasn't journalism. It was harassment with better grammar." The studio tightened. Even the crew looked up from their monitors. Christiane remained composed. Intrigue flickered, then settled. "I see," she said. "And yet some critics argue you've leveraged the media just as effectively, through documentaries, interviews, a memoir. Is that fair?" Meghan's smile vanished. "People love to say media when a woman speaks for herself," she replied, voice cool. "When she tells her own story, it's suddenly strategy instead of sovereignty." Silence stretched, clean, taut. A pen clicked shut somewhere off camera. Christiane glanced at her notes, then back up, the next question forming as the red tally light burned on. When a man does it, they call it leadership. The line dropped like a pebble into a still pond. Christiane gave a small nod, unfazed. Fair point, she said. But surely you understand why some see a contradiction in advocating for privacy while maintaining such a public platform? Meghan crossed one leg over the other, voice cool. Privacy isn't isolation. It's control. The right to decide what to share, when to share it, and with whom. People struggle with that because they're used to consuming others, not respecting them. Christiane's gaze stayed steady. There was something magnetic about Meghan's defiance, polished yet simmering. That's an interesting distinction, she said carefully. Do you ever worry the public might read your version of privacy as selective transparency? Meghan's expression tightened. People can interpret whatever they want. They usually do. A thin pause followed, the kind where truth gives way to tension. Meghan adjusted her cuff, the corners of her mouth lifting into a polite, almost mocking smile. Christiane didn't miss a beat. Her voice remained calm, but the edge sharpened. Let's talk about your husband, Prince Harry. You're one of the most watched couples in the world. How do you balance the attention, the constant scrutiny? Meghan's eyes flicked to the camera, then back. It's simple, she said smoothly. We don't read the noise. We live our lives. People project what they want. We've stopped caring. That sounds peaceful, Christiane said, a faint smile. It is, Meghan replied. Then, after a beat. Peace happens when you stop needing approval from people who never liked you in the first place. The words hung in the air, eloquent, defensive, faintly bitter. For the first time, Christiane leaned in. Has that detachment come at a cost, personally or professionally? You mean, have I lost fans? Meghan's tone sharpened. No, Christiane. I've lost noise, and that isn't a loss. It's liberation. The control room slipped into a tense silence. Only 20 minutes in, and the air already felt sharper, thinner. Christiane jotted a brief note on her cue card, her expression unreadable. She had sat through war briefings and political standoffs. She knew the unmistakable quiet before a clash. And inside that CNN studio, one had just been drawn. Two women, one asking questions, the other refusing to yield to them. After the commercial break, the second half began. The lights seemed brighter now, almost glaring, the air-conditioned chill biting through the set. Meghan adjusted her earpiece, offered a composed smile to the crew, and settled back into her seat. Christiane returned with her trademark serenity, the kind that could steady a diplomat, but never quite soften the edges. Welcome back, Christiane said smoothly. We're continuing our conversation with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, on life, identity, and the public eye. Thank you, Christiane, Meghan replied, her voice calm, her posture measured. I hope we can keep it as a conversation this time. Christiane let out a short, knowing laugh. Of course. I'm not here to interrogate you. The words were gentle, but the air between them pulsed with quiet friction. She leaned forward slightly. You've talked about redefining your place, not only as a public figure, but as a woman navigating the weight of power, privilege, and perception. Do you think people misunderstand you? Meghan clasped her hands in her lap, choosing her words carefully. People love their stories, she said. It's ironic, isn't it? I've built my life around storytelling, but the moment I tell my own, it's called manipulation. Christiane gave a thoughtful nod. So narrative becomes both weapon and shield. Meghan's eyes flickered with something between humor and exhaustion. That's what happens when you're a woman who doesn't fit inside anyone's tidy frame. Meghan's voice was smooth, measured. People can't seem to decide whether to praise you or punish you. A subtle hush swept across the studio, that familiar quiet that followed one of Meghan's perfectly aimed remarks. Christiane let the silence stretch, then leaned forward slightly. Still, she began evenly, you've been called, fairly or not, calculating. Some say your every word feels rehearsed. Meghan's expression didn't waver, but her voice cooled, precise as glass. I find that fascinating, Christiane. When men are strategic, they're respected. When women are, they're called deceitful. But I'm sure you've noticed that pattern yourself. Christiane's eyes narrowed, not in irritation, but in curiosity. I've noticed patterns everywhere, she said. But sometimes patterns reveal truth, don't they? I think they reveal bias, Meghan countered. People see what they need to justify what they already believe. Christiane nodded slowly. Then tell me, what is the truth, Meghan? Not the version on camera, not the one written about you. Your truth. For the first time, Meghan hesitated. Not in doubt, but in calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice softened, almost lyrical. The truth is, I've had to build peace in a world obsessed with my pain. The line was elegant, rehearsed, maybe, but Christiane didn't flinch. And yet, she said carefully, you've stayed visible. The world didn't force you into the spotlight. You've chosen to keep the cameras close. A flicker crossed Meghan's face, the faintest crack in her composure. I use my voice, she said quietly. That's not the same as chasing attention. Christiane's tone was almost gentle. Do you think your audience sees that distinction? I don't owe clarity, Meghan replied sharply, to people committed to misunderstanding me. The temperature seemed to drop again. Her voice was calm, but the steel beneath it had begun to show. Christiane didn't push, not harshly. Her next words were deliberate, careful as a scalpel. Let's talk about your time in the UK. You've spoken about feeling isolated, even unsafe. Yet critics, especially in Britain, say the monarchy gave you one of the largest global stages in history. How do you answer that? Meghan's eyes flickered just briefly. That's an interesting way to phrase it, she said, as though privilege cancels harm. That's like saying a woman can't speak about harassment if she got a promotion. Christiane tilted her head. So you see your experience as systemic mistreatment? I see it as survival, Meghan said. You can paint the bars gold if you want. It's still a cage. The control room was silent. Her voice had found its rhythm, that same deliberate cadence that carried her through speeches and charity galas. But this wasn't a keynote. This was dissection. And Christiane's questions, precise and unyielding, were cutting closer with each one. You've said before that freedom is about control, Christiane began, tone steady but blade sharp. But isn't control just another kind of confinement? Meghan's smile disappeared, the last trace of ease gone from her face. No, she said, voice low but firm. Control is dignity, and I won't apologize for claiming mine. Christiane nodded once, jotting something on her note card. Then let's talk about dignity, she said. You've built your public image on compassion, empathy, empowerment. Yet, some former staff and colleagues describe your leadership as difficult. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Meghan's eyes tightened. Difficult? Christiane didn't blink. Yes, demanding, cold, unyielding. Those were the words used. A small, incredulous laugh escaped Meghan's lips. And I assume every one of them is anonymous. For a beat, Christiane hesitated. Barely perceptible, but enough. Meghan caught it instantly. There's always someone hiding behind a source, she continued, her voice now cool as marble. You'd think after years in journalism, you'd recognize gossip when you hear it. Christiane's smile was faint, controlled, the kind that gave nothing away. Anonymous or not, perception can tell its own truth. Then maybe you should ask, Meghan snapped, her composure thinning, why powerful women are always branded difficult the moment they stop being compliant. If I were a man, you'd call me decisive. Christiane didn't flinch. Her voice softened, but only slightly. Some might, she said. Others might just call it arrogance. The air went still. Even the hum of the lights seemed to vanish. Meghan blinked once, twice, her armor finally showing a crack. I beg your pardon? Meghan asked, her voice sharp enough to frost glass. Christiane calmly set her pen down. You talk about compassion, she said evenly, yet dismiss every challenge as bias or rumor. Confidence and condescension can look identical on camera, Meghan. The difference, she added, her tone soft but unflinching, is how people feel when the cameras turn off. Meghan's jaw tightened. I didn't come here to be insulted. And I didn't come here to be performed for, Christiane replied smoothly. You're articulate, yes, but the world isn't waiting for another monologue. They're waiting for something real. For a long, heavy second, the only sound was the quiet hum of the studio lights. Meghan's fingers curled tightly in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was low, precise, but dangerous. Sincerity doesn't require your validation. Christiane didn't look away. No, she said quietly, but accountability does. The red light above the camera blinked on, bright, unyielding. Two women sat facing each other, one simmering, one composed. Both knew it now. The polite interview was over. What followed would decide who left the studio in control. The third segment began with a subtle shift in air, heavier, colder. The lights seemed harsher. Even the whir of the equipment felt amplified. Meghan sat motionless, posture perfect, hands folded in a picture of calm. But her eyes told another story, sharp, deliberate, waiting. Christiane returned from the break with that familiar poise, the kind forged from decades of questioning presidents and warlords alike. "Welcome back," she said smoothly. "We're continuing our conversation with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. We've talked about the weight of visibility and the pursuit of freedom. Now, I'd like to turn to something broader, legacy." Meghan tilted her head, the faintest of smiles returning, carefully composed. "Legacy," she echoed. That's always the word people use when they're trying to define someone else's life, isn't it? Christiane's lips curved slightly, a knowing smile. "Sometimes." "You've built a global platform, Meghan," Christiane said, her voice smooth but weighted. "Surely you've considered what you want that legacy to be?" "I want it to be truth," Meghan replied without hesitation. "Authenticity. I want people to see that I never compromised who I am, even when silence would have been easier." Christiane nodded, pen poised but unmoving. "And yet," she continued, "many believe you've grown more distant, guarded, even adversarial, toward the same press that once helped you share that truth." Meghan's tone cooled instantly. "I didn't use the press, Christiane. I spoke my story. The press used me." "I see," Christiane said evenly. "Do you think there was ever middle ground? Any shared responsibility in how that dynamic evolved?" Meghan let out a short, humorless laugh. "You mean, am I to blame for the way the British tabloids treated me? For the harassment, the racial abuse, the endless distortions? Is that what you're implying?" Christiane didn't blink. "I'm suggesting that fame and influence are rarely simple. Every story has more than one truth." "Well," Meghan said sharply, "mine just happens to be the one that's real." The silence that followed was taut, electric. Even the camera operator hesitated before refocusing. Christiane's next question came softly but carried weight. "You've spoken often about truth. I'd like to ask about your relationship with the royal family, specifically whether there's any room left for reconciliation. Have you had contact with Prince William or the Princess of Wales since the Queen's passing?" Meghan's jaw tensed. "I don't discuss family matters publicly." Christiane's tone remained steady. "But you have, in interviews, in the documentary, in your memoir." "That was context," Meghan cut in, her voice clipped. "There's a difference between defending yourself and feeding the gossip machine." Christiane stayed composed. "Still, people wonder if reconciliation is possible." Meghan smiled faintly, not kindly. "People are always curious when a woman leaves something toxic. They call it forgiveness when they want the spectacle to go on. I call it peace when I choose not to return." Christiane leaned back slightly, studying her, thoughtful, unshaken. "So no reconciliation, then?" Christiane asked quietly. "No need for one," Meghan replied. It was the kind of sentence that could headline 100 papers by morning. Christiane glanced down at her notes, then looked up again. "And your husband, Prince Harry, how has he handled the distance from his family?" "He's fine," Meghan said smoothly. "Thriving, actually. We're building a life that's grounded, healthy, happy." "Not everyone can say that." Christiane nodded slowly. "He's spoken before about the loss of his mother, how it shaped his distrust of the media. Would you say you share that distrust, or that you fueled it?" For the first time, something flickered across Meghan's face. A split-second crack in the practiced calm. Her lips parted, her eyes narrowing. "Fueled it?" she echoed. "You make it sound like it's a fire he didn't start himself." "I didn't mean it that way," Christiane said softly. "But that's how it sounds," Meghan replied, her tone hardening. "People love to paint me as the manipulative one, The woman behind the curtain, pulling emotional strings. It's lazy. It's sexist. And frankly, it's beneath a journalist of your reputation. Christiane didn't move. The stillness around her was absolute. Her posture steady, her voice low but edged with quiet authority. I think my reputation earns me the right to ask difficult questions, Meghan. You've built a brand around telling your truth. Surely that includes being open to examination. Meghan gave a short, sharp laugh, more exhale than humor. Scrutiny and interrogation aren't the same thing. Christiane's eyes didn't waver. Neither, she said evenly, are sincerity and performance. The silence that followed was thick enough to hum. The air went still. Meghan's smile vanished completely now, her expression tightening into disbelief. Excuse me? Christiane leaned forward, unflinching, maintaining the kind of steady gaze that could cut through pretense. You speak beautifully about empathy and integrity, she said evenly, but every response feels practiced, defensive. If your truth is as genuine as you claim, why does it sound so curated? For a heartbeat, Meghan looked almost startled. Then her expression settled into something colder, measured. Her tone dropped to a quiet, dangerous calm. Because, Christiane, when you've been attacked for years, you learn to weigh every word. Some of us don't have the luxury of stumbling through our truth. Christiane's pen hovered over her notebook. Then she set it down deliberately. That's fair, she admitted. But truth, real truth, doesn't always come perfectly phrased. Meghan's voice sharpened. Maybe that's why you're the one asking questions instead of answering them. A ripple of unease passed through the crew. The tension on set was tangible, the kind that made people forget to breathe. Christiane didn't move. Her composure was the calm before a storm. Meghan, she said softly, you came here to talk about your journey. But every question seems to offend you. Every topic turns into an accusation. Why do you think that is? Meghan leaned back, crossing her arms. Maybe because you're not listening, Christiane. Maybe because you're too focused on cornering me. I'm not trying to corner you, Christiane replied, her patience thinning for the first time. I'm trying to understand you. Then maybe you should start by respecting me, Meghan snapped. Christiane's expression darkened slightly, her voice quiet but firm. Respect, she said, isn't the same as agreement. The silence that followed was suffocating. Meghan's breathing quickened, her jaw rigid, eyes locked on Christiane with visible fury. For the first time in her long career, Christiane Amanpour looked almost tired. She flicked a glance toward the control room, a subtle cue that things were slipping beyond control, and as the seconds dragged on, one truth settled heavy in the air. Neither woman was going to back down. The final act was unfolding and the cameras were still rolling. The air inside the CNN studio had turned heavy, thick with the residue of civility burned away. What had started as polite restraint had melted into something volatile, electric. Meghan sat upright, her shoulders squared, her jaw tight, eyes bright with controlled indignation. Across from her, Christiane Amanpour, unshaken but visibly nearing the edge of patience, leaned in slightly. It wasn't anger that tightened her tone now, but principle. Let's continue, Christiane said evenly, though the calm in her voice had cooled to something harder. You've spoken often about compassion and empowerment, Meghan. But when compassion is tested, when people disagree, when they challenge you, what happens then? Does it hold or does it fade? Meghan's smile was small, deliberate, the kind that carried warning more than warmth. No, Christiane. Compassion doesn't mean agreeing with everyone. It means knowing where your boundaries are. And frankly, I think some people in your line of work could learn a bit more about those. Christiane gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Her pen hovered over her notepad, still but ready. Boundaries are important, she said quietly. But so is accountability. When millions listen to your voice, don't you think you owe them honesty, even when it's uncomfortable? I am honest, Meghan replied sharply. I just don't owe my vulnerability to every lens pointed at me. Christiane's voice softened, but the softness carried steel. Then why keep sitting in front of them? The words hit like a clean strike. The crew went still. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Meghan blinked, once, then again, her composure faltering just enough for the break to show. For the first time, the confidence she wore like armor thinned. "I'm here because I have something to say," Meghan replied, her voice rising just enough to slice through the still air. "Not because I owe explanations to journalists who twist every word I speak." Christiane didn't flinch. Her pen rested motionless on the notepad. "I've spent my career covering wars, revolutions, human rights violations," she said quietly. "I don't twist words, Meghan, I clarify them. There's a difference." "Oh, please." Meghan's laugh was short, brittle, entirely humorless. "Don't turn this into some noble crusade. This isn't about journalism, it's about entertainment. You want your headline, don't you?" Meghan lashes out. "Go ahead. That's what you came for." Christiane remained still, though a flicker of weariness crossed her expression. "No, Meghan," she said. "I came for truth. But it seems every time truth walks toward you, you call it an attack." The words landed like a blow, not loud, but deep. For a heartbeat, neither woman spoke. Meghan's lips parted slightly, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "How dare you?" she said, voice low but shaking. "You don't know what I've lived through." "You're right," Christiane said softly. "I don't? But I've interviewed people who've survived far worse, and they did so without weaponizing their pain." That did it. The air in the studio snapped taut. "Weaponizing?" Meghan repeated, her voice climbing, sharp and raw now. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have your every move dissected, your motives questioned, your existence turned into gossip?" Christiane's response came with quiet precision, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. "I do," she said. "It's called public life. It comes with power. And power," she added, leaning forward ever so slightly, "comes with scrutiny." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It vibrated. Cameras hummed. A light flickered overhead. The control room didn't dare cut to commercial, and for the first time, Meghan Markle, Duchess, advocate, global figure, looked less like a guest and more like someone on trial. That's not oppression, Meghan. That's consequence. The silence that followed was like a storm holding its breath. Meghan's knuckles whitened around the armrest. She drew a slow breath through her nose, then stood abruptly. "I don't need to sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks empathy is a debate tactic," she said, her voice tight. Christiane remained seated, her tone calm but deliberate. "No one's lecturing you. But perhaps, for once, someone isn't afraid to tell you what others won't, that not every disagreement is cruelty, and not every question is an attack." Meghan shook her head, disbelief flashing across her face. "You know what, Christiane? I expected better. But clearly this isn't a conversation. It's an ambush." She reached for her lapel mic and tore it free with a sharp metallic snap. The burst of static filled the studio. Christiane folded her hands, unshaken. "If you walk away now," she said quietly, "that tells the world more than any answer could." For a brief moment, Meghan froze. A flicker of hesitation, doubt maybe, passed through her eyes. Then she turned sharply toward the exit. Her heels struck the studio floor with crisp precision, echoing through the stunned silence. The doors closed behind her. The crew stared at Christiane, waiting for a cue, to cut, to fade, to breathe. Christiane exhaled slowly, then straightened her notes. She looked directly into the main camera. "To our viewers," she began softly, "sometimes conversations don't go the way we intend, but that's the nature of truth. It's uncomfortable, it's imperfect, and it doesn't wait for permission." Her voice steadied, her eyes calm, though the fatigue beneath them was unmistakable. "What you just saw wasn't about winning or losing," she continued. "It was about the cost of living in a world where honesty and image collide." We thank our guest for her time. The red tally light faded to black. The crew finally exhaled, a collective release. In the stillness that followed, there was an unspoken understanding. Another headline was already being written, another clip already going viral. What did you think of that tense showdown between Meghan Markle and Christiane Amanpour? Was Meghan right to walk away? Or did Christiane finally ask the questions no one else dared? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life interviews that spiral out of control.